good afternoon, and good evening. From wherever you're joining us in the world, we're thankful for you to be a part of the conversation as we continue our GU webinar series this October with Mr. Tony Senabaratne. Our topic today is the path to progress, power versus participation. And Mr. Tony, you've spent some time here in Sri Lanka setting up some organizations that has worked with youth in the past. And in the few conversations that you and I have had since I've been here, this has been a topic that has come up. Why are you so passionate about youth participation?
Thank you, Jordan. As most of you join us, I'd like to say that I'm honored and privileged to be here today and to be able to share with you and to be able to learn from you. And hopefully together we would be able to make some progress and see what we can do about some of the issues that we're going to discuss. To answer your question, Jordan, I first began to become aware of this issue when I got involved with the idea of combating the sexual abuse of children. And I learned what a horrible issue it was. It was global, it was cut across all types of societies, it was in every place. There was no safe place for children, whether it was their home or their school or their place of worship or whatever, there was no place that they could escape it. And I realized that the main reason for it is that children were powerless. They were powerless with adults. And when we began to find ways to combat this menace, we realized that we have to empower children. If children, 40% of the solution was to make children aware that they had the power to say no and to be able to stop an abuse being happening to them. And if it did happen to them, to be able to do something about it. So that's where the passion came from.
The passion, and it's every conversation that we've had, it has been something that has been so real. And I want to also say one more thing, as throughout the conversation, as you're joining live, please feel free to engage and add questions in. We want to engage with you as the global community in this conversation. So to get us started, what exactly is youth participation? What is meant by power and what is meant by participation? So,
again, I like to just emphasize what Jordan says. If we speak this whole time without your coming in with some question, then we would consider this to be quite a failed project.
That's right.
Because we need to know that you are listening and that you have questions about what we say. And nothing that I can say is kind of written in stone. It's open to question, it's open to discussion. So to go back to the issue of power is to define it. Now, when I look at the dictionary, there are basically 10 definitions for power, and we are only going to talk about 2 of them. That is the power of position. People have power due to the position they hold, and then they have power due to the resources they have. So these are 2 areas of power that people use. And in today's context, for example, I'll start with the universal. We are watching huge areas in the world where there are conflicts going on, and that's why Sri Lanka Unites is here. We've had our own conflict going on for the past 30 to 40 years, 3 decades and more, when people in power have abused that. So that is on, and all of you are familiar with the kind of wars, with the kind of inter-civil strife. And then there is the personal abuse of power. Right now, for example, I was talking to Jordan this afternoon about the scandal going on in US with the Harvey Weinstein scandal. I don't know whether that's how you pronounce his name.
Weinstein, I think.
Weinstein,
yeah,
okay.
Close enough.
Just like my name, some names are difficult to pronounce. And that has opened a can of worms where a lot of the women are saying that they were abused when they were little children. And it's really showing how the power of people to be able to misuse it. So that's where we're going to come from. And if you look at, I don't know whether you can see, if you can look at that Sri Lanka Unites chart that we have up here, if you take a look at that, and even here you have a thing called SHOW, SHOW, which is Stop Harassment of Women. And what that really means is for a lot of women and ladies and children who travel in buses or on the roads, they are harassed in ways, they're not raped, but they would be harassed by being touched or being pinched or remarks being cast. And it's to kind of stop this. It's people who have use it when people, they feel that the women don't have the power to stop them. So that's where we are going with this. So if you have any questions about that, please, or if you have anything of your observations of what you find in your own country, that you had the same experience. I'll come back to my own experiences in a while, but if you have anything that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you.
That's right, and also just so this idea of youth participation and the I guess abuse of power by some and the elder range of the adults or authority. What does it practically look like to have youth and children engaged in a participatory role?
Okay, so let me give you another example from my own life. When I was a very young person, maybe in the 5th grade, one of the periods in school, the master hadn't come, so we just do our own thing. I had taken a book out and I was reading it. And then suddenly I got a thundering slap and I kind of like woke up from a daze and I said, what the, and I had a... And you see, the master had walked in and everybody had stood up because that's what you do when the master walks in. But I had continued to read my book because I was oblivious. I love books and I was oblivious. And then he thought that I was disrespecting him. And he came up and slapped me hard. And that has always remained with me as an abuse of power. So I explained to him, I wasn't disrespecting you. I didn't know you had come in. There was no master in the class. But he would have none of it. And he just thought that he was right. It was one of the things that stuck with me. The second part is in schools. This is another part of life. I don't know how you've been in your schools, but in my school, if you obeyed all the rules, you were a sissy. You had to break the rules. You had to do everything possible to break the rules. And I'm not going to spend time talking about what we did, but we did. And if you got a caning or if you got a public punishment, that was a sign of valor that you had done something. Now the reason is because there is a natural tendency to rebel against authority. When somebody says don't do something or you can't do something, you want to do that.
That's right.
And I found that as a natural part of my lifestyle. I've also found it as a part of young people. They don't like to follow all the rules and they think that if they have the rules are unfair for one reason or the other. So that's where the starting point goes.
Right. So when it comes to our context and as a younger generation, because most of the people who are joining in are youth activists across the world, how is it that we engage with the older generations to kind of bring this to the forefront, to allow platforms for there to be further engagement and for younger people and even children specifically for their voice to be heard? It's a good point. I don't know whether it happens in your countries, but I know in Sri Lanka at one time there was a very strong kind of thing that children should be seen and not heard when grown-ups are around. And in other words, children don't have a voice. They are not supposed to voice their opinion because grown-ups know best, so you don't contradict them. Right.
And that is where the problem starts, because whenever people are in power, because grown-ups are in power, they think they know it, and then they carry that on to other grown-ups. So let me start with, again, when at one point I was the deputy chairman in Sri Lanka of the National Child Protection Authority. It was set up, we helped to set it up, and then it was directly under the president of Sri Lanka. And as a result of that program, I traveled on to Sweden to study what was called the Children's Ombudsman. And in Sweden, I saw a school that was completely different. Children at different ages, at age group level, so below the 5th grade and below the 8th grade and then below the higher grades, they belonged to a group that comprised of students who had been elected to be there, parents and teachers, and they worked out what should be done in the school, whatever had to be done, whether the school had to be cleaned or whether about the curriculum, about discipline. The children discussed it and the parents and the teachers all discussed it together and took a joint decision. So they owned the administration of the school. And it went up so much that the senior students in the senior, what we call the A-levels or you call high school, they even had an appointment. They kept 2 seats for them on the local government. So they had a voice in how the area or the district was also being run. So they could take what the issues were in their school or what they heard their friends say and then be representative. And it was amazing when I walked into that school how they didn't look at us. They were running around doing their work. They owned the situation. And that was so different to some other countries that I went.
Right.
For example, in the UK, when we walked into a class, the teacher literally had to beg the students to turn around and pay attention.
Wow.
So it's because there was like no respect.
Yeah.
It was like an ongoing conflict. So it's the setting up of this whole thing.
Do you believe that the lack of respect or things that you saw in those settings were because of maybe a trust issue from the youth's perspective, and then also maybe from when it comes to decision making, the adults and the authorities saying, maybe the youth aren't as up to par as far as knowing what they need to know in order to have a voice in certain situations?
Actually, it's very hard to put my finger. I mean, to be honest, it's both and everything. There are issues from children's background. There are issues from their home. There's baggage from the community. Children themselves can be very vicious to children. So there can be the issue of children tormenting and harassing children. It's a whole gamut of issues, but it all comes down to power. For example, again, I'm coming back to my own school experience. In my school career, in every class, there was one thing known as the first fighter and the second fighter.
Oh, goodness.
So people could challenge them for that position. So after school, you'd go around, they'll get round you, and then you get into the middle of it, and you pummel each other until one fellow falls. Then he becomes the first fighter.
Yeah.
And the other guy who falls is the second fighter. And whenever the school, when you have whatever it is, they divide by belonging to one of the two teams. But you can see that it's about power.
Right.
So there is the power of how strong you are, whether you can whip everybody else.
Right.
So it's always about that issue of power, and it was something I grew up and I wondered what can be done to change this. Because wherever you went, whatever you did, you had it, whether it was in the church, whether it was in the school, whether it was in institutions. I mean, I'm sure every one of you have undergone issues when you have been victims of power and you have felt the injustice of power. But I'm also sure that if you think hard enough, that you have also used that power when you are in control to do the same thing.
Right.
So it's not that we are all victims and the others are we are all both victim and perpetrator.
And part of it is just being more cognizant of when we're doing that and allowing us to say, well, if we don't like it done to ourselves, then we have to carry out power differently in our context.
Absolutely. So we have to learn what it is to be able to, because power is a good thing. I mean, you need power. Just like you need resources, you need power. And that's fine. But you need to know when it's wrong, either when you are using it, and you need to first understand that how you misuse your own power. Right. Because all of us have power. There is nobody without power. Right. Even a little child, a little baby has power. You know how
and
that
it cries, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They cry, and then people, they have to be carried or fed. So everybody exercises some form of power. Now the question is, you can exercise it well, or you can exercise it badly. And the question is, how do we do it well? Guys, we've done a lot of talking, and girls.
Yes.
We've done a lot of talking. We'd love to hear from you.
We want to encourage you to submit any questions you may have as we continue the conversation, especially when it comes to whether it's things that you've seen in your own communities, in your own schools, or whatever range of engagements that you've seen. If it's a power issue or something that you've seen, or if it's how can we engage more with youth and having them participate. But as we wait for your questions, because we know that they're coming in, let me ask you, Mr. Tony, is it in the terms of peace building, because Global Unites is a youth peace building organization, and a lot of those tuning in are young peace activists across the world. How does child participation and maybe the engagement of power in a different way, how does that apply to them in the way that they act out their engagement?
See, I think whatever you learn, when your mind as a young person, think of it like the word of a computer. When you get a computer, you in itself it has nothing, it's just a piece of hardware. And you got to put in software to make anything out of it. Otherwise it can't do anything.
Right.
It can't tell you anything. So software has to go into it. So think of yourself as a child, it's like that. What is the software that's going into you? What is the levels that is going into you? Now, to begin with, the schooling system and the whole idea system is based on competition. Our identity is based on competition. How good am I? How good a student am I? How good a athlete am I? How good looking am I? So we always judge ourselves in comparison to how much better we are or how much worse we are than others. And that either creates a superiority or an inferiority complex. And that superiority or inferiority complex keeps switching from place to place. So the question is, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of competition and make it cooperation or participation, so that I don't have to believe that I have to be better than somebody to be somebody.
Right.
I can just be myself and enjoy being myself. And I don't have to be better. I remember one parent in Sri Lanka, it's very competitive, the school system is very competitive. And a parent told me, I'm really worried about my child, their education at the moment. And I asked, what's worrying you? And he said, well, she's coming third now. She used to be first. And I said, okay, what are her grades? He said, it's dropped from 92 to 90. I said, you need to go see a psychiatrist.
Oh, wow.
Or you really need to have something done to you, because you're really nuts and you're driving your children to be nuts if you think that's bad. Because the people lose the joy of what they're doing.
Right.
Because they think they have to compete to be the first. Why? You need to enjoy learning. Learning is an enjoyable thing. It's not how much better you learn than others. So all of this comes down to, because our home background is where the background is laid. Unfortunately, that's something that also has to happen. The idea of participation also has to start with homes, with parents learning to bring children to participate in the running of the home, in taking decisions in their home.
That's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, though, isn't it?
It is, but it's also a very enjoyable thing, because then the children aren't fighting you.
Right.
They know that they are having a voice, they are being heard. So they can talk about, and it's an amazing thing that takes place. So instead of, I told you to do that, okay, we discussed that we are going to do it like this. So now why isn't it happening? So there is room for discussion. Otherwise it's, I told you, you do it because I told you.
Right.
Or you're here because I want you here at this time. There isn't a room for a discussion. Now it may seem a lot of work, but if it starts at the home, it will then boil over into school.
Right.
Now basically I may be wrong on this, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, plus you all can tell me. I think it's pretty difficult for grown-ups to change. The only reason I tried to change was because I had to deal with the problems. If I was just a normal parent, I probably wouldn't have changed. I had only one son, but I would want him to do what I wanted him to do.
Right.
But because I had, for 45 years, I have been working on this whole issues and projects, I have had to try to find the answers. And for me, the answer starts with, you can change some grown-ups, and there are grown-ups who will change. But the best chance of change is with children.
Right.
If they change, they will bring the change to their children. Their children will be much better. And the change will get better and better as time goes.
Right. So we've actually gotten a couple questions in now.
Okay.
So we'll go ahead and start addressing those. Thank you, Susan Thomas, for the hometown shout-out coming from Columbia, South Carolina. What kind of structure within a classroom would help to include students to buy into the ownership of the class, to kind of giving them power?
Well, the structure would be that whatever the decisions are being taken around, in a school there are various decisions that are taken. And when those decisions are taken, if there is a discussion about it, so that your parents and your teachers and the students, that the teachers representing the school authorities, the parents representing what you want, have a discussion about what is being done. So for example, I'm just giving an example. Teacher gives a lots of homework. And the children think, hey, this is crazy. I spend all my time in school. Then I go home and I do lots of homework. And then there is no time for me. So can the parents and the teachers get together and discuss that? So maybe you can give me some situations where you have felt that you have had no voice and you would have liked to have had a voice in school.
Very good. And on to another question specifically when it comes to women and young girls. From Rebecca Aman in Washington, D.C., how do you encourage more girls and young women to participate?
Well, it's the same as guys. I mean, women probably have have less power because maybe physically or they tend to not have the power that a guy could have. I don't know, maybe in Sri Lanka certainly that is certainly the case. It's changing a bit more, and as more young girls are educated and get jobs, the power roles are changing, but I think it's still very much there in schools. It's to be able to know that you have that right. So primarily it also comes from what children are told about what their rights are. Now, I dealt a lot with what is called the Convention of the Child Rights, which is hugely, almost worldwidely accepted by almost every country, has signed up that children have rights. And those rights are to be heard, that they have the right to be heard. They have the right to express their opinion. Now, children need to be aware of these rights, but they also need to be aware of their responsibility. So the right and responsibility has to go hand in hand. So sometimes children can be very conscious of rights but have no concept of their responsibilities. So it's a matter of learning about what rights you have. And it's a matter of being able to discuss that, not as a demand, but as an open discussion. Because just as much as you have your rights, your parents have their rights, the teachers have their rights. So you have to learn how to kind of combine those rights. Right. So that it meets everybody. It's a win-win situation for everybody.
Because like you said earlier, we, as an individual, we have to be willing to teach it a different way, to approach it a different way, so that whoever it is that we have influence over, whether it's our own child or maybe people younger than us that look up to us, that we can encourage that kind of dialogue and that kind of level playing field as well. Moving on to another question. Hey, Columbia, South Carolina, I appreciate the love. We're getting more questions from my hometown. Beyond the education system, what can communities do to promote unity and peace among those who have different ideals? Who should lead this? Should it be the government? Should it be churches? Should it be individuals?
I think everybody has a responsibility to lead it. Certainly our local government, our local representation, you have to use your voice to vote for a certain type of attitude. For example, governments might create an attitude. I mean, I'm just getting you an example. I have to stay away from politics. I don't want to get into politics. But when you discriminate against a certain group of people, or you think this group of people should be discriminated against, then you have to raise your voice towards it. So everybody, starting from as young as you get, can express their opinion. And I have seen some amazing young people, sometimes on TV programs, who have stood up and who have spoken out and who have actually done things that have changed their own society.
Right.
And I think all of you have the power to do that. You just have to ask the question, what is it that I want to change? What change do I want to bring about? And that change must start at least a part of you, because if you don't want to change, you cannot expect other people to change.
That's right.
So you first have to look and say, what is it that I am doing that I need to change? And when you change that, you have that as an example, as an open discussion. So if you were intolerant towards some people, if you disliked somebody or something, and you can find a way to change that, then you have an example by which you work. So you can never work on things until you have worked on the micro. It's from the micro that you go to the macro. So we love to change macro things,
right,
but we think that we don't need to change ourselves. And that's where the basic problem lies.
Yeah, and as a movement with Global Unites, we believe in a grassroots level engagement. We believe in the youth starting things where they are. Make a change where you are, and then continue to build. Come across other youth who are like-minded, other people who are like-minded, build that up, and then there's going to be a connection from the top eventually, right? But we have to be willing to change our own circumstances, be willing to change ourselves in the first place. Continuing on with questions, Amos in Uganda, he's our national director for Uganda Unites.
Hi, Emma.
Yes. It says, Uganda Unites focuses on working with students and student leaders in high schools. The student leaders have a lot of power in the school, but not necessarily do they have the respect of other students because some of the student leaders are selected by the school administration. How then do you get them to influence students to participate in conflict transformation and in community activities that they lead?
That's an excellent question, and I don't, there isn't one answer that can create it all, but you have to take the principles, and I hear the principles. Now, I'm going back to, again, I'll take Sri Lanka. In certain schools in Sri Lanka, not the school that I went to, the prefects, or what did you call them? What were they called? The student leaders?
Oh, yeah, at the high schools, the student leaders that get selected by the administration.
Yeah. So in Sri Lanka, they are called prefects. That means they are the student leaders. They are also, or the class monitors. They are selected by the teacher or the high school, and as a result, some of them have a lot of power, and they could become a kind of what would you call it? As distasteful as anything you could get, like a police force that's gone bad. In my school, the prefects were only there, they were only doing their duties during certain times of the day. The other times of the day they didn't have power. So now, this whole thing is you give people power, and the question is, do they know how to use it? So I go back to that principle. Power must, there is that famous saying that many of you, I'm sure, know, that power corrupts. And how do you complete that, Jordan?
Oh goodness, you put me on the spot. I'm not going to be able to.
Okay, absolute power absolutely corrupts. So if you have a power that doesn't listen, or that can't be reasoned with, or that people don't have an approach to, then you are in trouble because you will misuse it. Absolutely. So the question is, when to be able to bring this whole issue of if a class leaders or prefects to have a discussion about what they are doing and how they treat the students, how they get about doing it. It's the structure that counts. I don't know whether you can just go in and change the whole thing immediately, but you can start a discussion at some point. So it's a discussion of the same thing of what we call democracy, where people are voted, I would like to see where students vote the leader, and then they can also have a vote in the leader being removed.
Right.
So the student leader also has to behave in a way that is conducive to the class.
Right.
Rather than just be somebody, I am in power, and the power behind me is the school body, and you don't have a say.
Right, and I was put here by them, so it allows us to corrupt our own power.
Okay.
In that sense. From Ibrahim, who's our country coordinator in Palestine, he asked, can there be equal sharing of power amongst individuals who don't necessarily agree or even have opposing opinions with each other? And if there is an equal sharing of power, how does that look? What elements have to be there to achieve it?
And just again, before I go on, I want to say that some of the things that I say you may not agree with, and please feel completely free to say, I'm sorry, I don't agree, or I have another idea or an opinion. So please feel free to do that, because it will raise the level of our discussion, because I don't know everything and I need to learn from, because you in your own countries have a huge experience that you have to share. Going back to your conversation, imagine you're in a team and you elect a captain. But a good captain will always consult his, Sri Lanka, cricket is a huge thing, or whether he'll consult the players as to how the best way to get about the game, the strategy of the game. Everybody has to play their part. No one person is absolutely important or can run the whole team. So different players have to play their part. And If all players feel that they are playing their part and their captain or their leader is utilizing them to the best of their extent, that makes it a happy combined team. I'm sure you understand that.
Yes.
So that is what we need to aim for. We have to. There has to be a leadership. There has to be a singular leader, but that leader has to be able to incorporate everybody's ideas. The leader is there to incorporate everybody's ideas, not to fulfill his own ideas and ambitions.
Yeah, and make others follow suit.
Exactly, because then it never works.
Right. So, continuing on, what are some of your most inspiring examples of change that has been caused by participation?
Okay. I'm trying to think of the experience. There are personal experiences and there are group experiences.
Okay.
To me, it has the struggle. Okay, I'll give you the group experience. At one point, I don't know whether you have heard a thing called Children Zones of Peace.
Right, the Zones of Peace.
Children's Zones of Peace was started by Nelson Mandela's second wife, Grace. I can't remember her name now. And it was picked up by UNICEF, and it's still going around the world as a part of that. For example, they get a conflict in some countries. They stop a conflict for 5 days, and children are vaccinated during that time.
Right.
Or they have corridors in which children can be moved out so that they can go to school or they can do something outside the conflict areas. It doesn't always happen, but it has happened. So it was at that time that I proposed to UNICEF. We had a group where all the heads of the children's programs plus the government met together, and we said, well, if we want to really make a change, we need to make schools a zone of peace. Now, in schools, the zone of peace is that one of the major issues in schools is bullying. Today, bullying is one of the
right.
huge areas, and that's again an issue of power. When people bully other people, it's an issue of power. There are issues of abuse. There's a lot of abuse that goes on in schools where younger children are raped by elder children. And this is especially in schools that have boardings. So we worked hard with schools, with organizations to bring about these changes. It's still not completely there, but we are getting there step by step. My ultimate desire is to see schools, like you have a standard that a school has being able to put, we are a zone of peace.
Right.
That means there's no bullying, there's no abuse, teachers don't abuse children. We have a huge problem in Sri Lanka with corporal punishment where teachers beat up children quite badly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's accepted even. Where the whole behavior in the school is a zone of peace, where people have the freedom to express their views and participate, and they feel that justice is being done.
Yeah, and it's at every level. It's from the school authority to even the teachers
Right.
and then the students as well.
It's to be feel that you are being treated justly and you treat people justly.
Do unto others, right? From right here in Sri Lanka, only civil societies speak about children, youth, and about reconciliation, but local government is doing nothing about this issue. Why is the government unable to include this issue in a local school syllabus?
Well, one of the things that I have been suggesting to schools is, now in Sri Lanka we have two major components. There is the Sinhalese and the Tamils, and then there is the Muslims on the other side. And especially between the Sinhalese and Tamils, there's quite a difference about our history. And I have said that our history books should have the controversial concepts side by side. Mm-hmm. So people read both sides, both students read both sides, and then they realize that, well, it could be either or,
right.
or both and, it doesn't matter, it's past. But when people begin to hold that, well, we were victors, or we were the ones who were here first,
right.
or we have the right to say that this is ours, then you have the conflict. So it is ownership that drives conflict.
Right.
World wars are fought because people want somebody else's land.
Right. There's always some sort of struggle in that.
Yeah, so it's basically you're trying to take what doesn't quite belong to you, right, but you think you have a right to it. So it is coming back on this. It's a part of the education system. I don't see that change happening easily because people are scared to let go of what they have because they think that if they let go, they will never get it back.
Yeah, there's like if I'm willing to step out or maybe a step of faith and let someone else in, will they give it back? Will they reciprocate that to me? Exactly. Am I going to lose any power, right? In that point of view. Another question from EJ in Columbia, South Carolina. How can you bridge the gap between the ideals of the older generation and the ideals of the younger generation? Is it more of a responsibility of the older generation to change their methods or responsibility of the younger generations to wait until it's their time to lead?
To be honest, the older generation is not going to change very easily, yeah, because they've got fixed in their ways. And I realize that things that have got fixed in me are difficult to change because they were fixed when I was a child. So the change is possible at the younger generation. That is why we believe in Sri Lanka Unites, right, and we believe in Global Unites, because the change can much easier take place with a young person because he has a chance before he gets into a system where he's got to thinking that way. Right. But the fact is that most young people are already indoctrinated into the whole concepts of ownership, of privilege, of power, of competition, of identity. So you already are carrying a huge disadvantage because you've grown up in that system. But it's easier for you to change now than to change later. Yeah,
because you'll be more rooted in that, or you will have found ways to get even deeper into those beliefs. We have a question from Hero, who's our national director in Liberia. He says, what is the role of the governed when their participation is hampered by the state?
The role of whom?
Oh, the people who are governed, like people who are underneath government rules, so pretty much everybody, right? What do they do? What is their role when the participation is hampered by those in higher power, government power, the state?
Okay, so the first thing you have to remember is that you have power. I don't know whether you have seen that famous picture of a guy with a marketing bag standing in front of a row of tanks. It's one of the most famous pictures.
Right.
Because this guy went and these tanks were about to roll into the city and go after a group of people, and he walked up and stood in front of it. And here was this thin, puny guy with a shopping bag stopping a whole column of tanks.
Yeah.
And so the fact is to believe that you have the power. There is power within you. One person can make a change to the world. Nelson Mandela, I know you know it all, he spent 22 years in prison to be able to bring about a change.
Right.
Individuals have brought about change because they have believed in an idea they have had. So it starts with you believing that you can make that change. If you believe that the change can only happen because people outside change, then you have, in some ways, what's the word? When you take away yourself, there is a word for it. You have made yourself impotent.
No, okay.
When you stop believing that you can't change, you can change the world.
You disengage yourself.
That's right. Yeah. So you castrate yourself, you cut yourself off at the neck, but you have an enormous amount of power. It's like, think of the atom has an enormous amount of power if the atom is opened or broken and it releases that.
Right.
So in every human being there is an enormous amount of power to do either good or evil. And we've seen both examples of that. So you need to learn to use that power that you have had to make that change. And I cannot at this point bring the examples, but fortunately today the internet is there for all of us, and there are immense stories of how people have used the power they have and the belief they have in an idea to make those changes.
We actually just got another question in from Liberia, Gaia Kaur. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name, but can undemocratic power go side by side with peace building?
Obviously no, because if it's an undemocratic power, that means the people aren't given a voice to make a change. The idea of democracy is that people have a voice and they have a voice to be able to make a change. So we have to bring that in. And I mean, you might have been amazed about how some countries move from dictatorships to changes, to a democracy. Now, it doesn't mean that all the democracy alone wins everything, but democracy in itself can have all of its problems. But like once my master in school told me when I happened to come at the head of the class, he said, I say, Tony, you are the best of the bad lot.
Oh, goodness.
So it is the best we have. Of all the systems that are around, a democracy is the best system we have because it gives us a voice. It gives every human being that at least when he has a chance to vote, he has a voice. He's placing his opinion for something or somebody.
Right.
So you have to, it starts by making that shift. It starts by trying to say we need to bring in a democratic process.
Very true. And we want to continue to just thank you and encourage you to send in questions. We've had questions from Liberia, from Uganda, from Palestine, from the United States, and from Sri Lanka. So we encourage you to continue to engage and send us in your questions as we continue on this topic. I want to ask, and they're also, the DRC is joining in. They had a little bit of connectivity issues. But
Can I just say one thing more?
Go for it.
It's not just questions. Please feel free to give your own suggestions and ideas. Maybe you have an example of what you have done. Please feel free to share that because we need you to say, yeah, I believe in change. I have made the change. I believe it can happen. So if you have an example, if you have an experience, please feel free to share that.
Absolutely. This is an open forum, open conversation for everyone. To continue on the conversation, how can we avoid something like tokenism, which is kind of seen as the facade of youth and children having participation and engagement when it's really more like a structured and controlled version, although it has the appearance of youth involvement?
Yeah, you will know that it's more than tokenism when your voice or your suggestions are seriously taken into consideration. And there's a ways of doing that. I mean, obviously, just as much as you would resist someone's voice being heard over everybody else, you must also believe that your voice should not be heard over everybody else's.
Right.
So it means that for example, if you, I'm just giving that example, you have a group of people and you want to carry out a program and you say, now, how should we do this? What are the ideas we have? You put the ideas on the table and you look are these the best ideas? And it doesn't mean that the majority is always right. You must also give some time to see whether maybe the minority can be more right than the majority. Sometimes.
Right.
And sometimes the majority may say, okay, let's try it this way, and then if it doesn't work, we'll try another way. So the thing is, as they say, change is the only constant.
Right.
And none of us will ever arrive. Whatever you do today, you can do better tomorrow.
Right.
And that's something you have to believe in. Never stop and stand and say, okay, this is it, we've arrived, this is the best we can get. You can always make it better. That is an absolute fact. Oh, am I saying the wrong thing, or am I? Because everything is, and there could be an exception to that, but nothing. You learn, you keep learning, just like our universe expands. You keep learning, and your experience will tell you something more tomorrow. Right. And you can make it better, and you got to believe that.
I believe it was Albert Einstein who said the moment you stop learning is the moment you should die, or something along those lines.
Yes.
We always have to be constantly learning. But as an individual, how do we come to the point of finding, maybe it's even the humility to swallow the pill where our ideas aren't that wrong, and I need to allow other people, especially when you were talking about the majority versus minority, and maybe the minority in a decision-making process has the better idea. How do you swallow that pill and allow progress to move forward?
I can't remember who it was, but somebody in the level of Albert Einstein, I wish I can remember who it was. He said he was a famous scientist, a huge scientist. I don't know, it may even be, who's the famous guy Stephen Hawking, who said the only thing I know is that I know nothing.
Oh.
Because if you look at the amount of information, when I was a young person, they told me, if you read from the day that you are born till you're 70 years old, you wouldn't have read even a niche of the books in a library.
Right.
Because there's so much to know, and today, by the time a book comes out, it's out of date.
Right.
So humility comes from knowing that you know nothing.
Right.
And that what you know, you're willing to learn, to change, and to work with. The moment you begin to believe that you know it, it's when you stop knowing.
Right. We got another question from our crew who's watching in Uganda. If the people or the government in power are shutting down every avenue of participation, how can you then create a space of participation for people who are still interested, regardless of the hardship? And how do you encourage them to get on board without fearing the government? So how do you create a space even if those in power aren't giving them a space for participation? And how do you encourage them to be a part of that space?
A great question, and I think that's really an important area. So the first thing is that most people, when they are under a dictatorial or when they are under a very strong power, feel disempowered and they give up. So it's call them into if you can get started in one small group with yourself and decide how collectively you can use that power, that your collective power then begins to have more.
Right.
Your collective voice begins to have more. I am currently working with a group who started called Self-Help Group. It started with one person. Sri Lanka is well known for its tea.
Right.
And these were tea smallholders who were growing tea on half-acre small plots. But the middlemen and the companies used to completely dominate them, and they used to get a really bad deal.
Right.
So he got a few people together and they began to raise their voice and say, we're not getting a fair deal. And then because they did that, other groups formed. Today there are 5,800 people who are raising their voice as a unified voice and making sure that they get a proper deal in the tea market. And they are getting a better price for their tea, they are getting a better deal, and the middleman is being cut out.
And it's all because of the coalition, the development of
That's
that
right.
community in a sense.
Exactly. That small group, it started with one person saying, I'll get together. So you look at some issue in your village or whatever it is, pull the group together, because you empower people when you talk and when you feel that each one is supporting each other.
Right. I've also found that when people feel valued, when they feel like they have something to bring to the table, then you can really inspire them to even further change. So if I can engage even just one person and encourage them that they can make a difference, then they will maybe be able to do it for two more people, and then two more people, and it continues to trickle down, and we find that before we know it, there's a coalition of people who are inspired to change something, whatever it is.
Absolutely. And look to make a small change. Don't go in for a big change, but look to make a small change.
Right.
In your community, in your school, in your home, wherever, look to make a small change. The moment you make that, you'll be empowered to make a bigger change.
Right. And it's being willing to use whatever power it is that we have right now to make the change that we can reach.
Well, I would say whatever corporation you raise.
Whatever corporation you raise. From Chaminda, who is our National Director for Sri Lanka Unites, he says, how will it affect the future of Sri Lanka if all of these, let's call them champions of change, get networked and work together as one? So the people, the youth, the adults, whoever are engaged and want to see change, what would it do for the future of Sri Lanka if they all got networked together?
Well, you must remember that champions of change, there are different change levels. When you at champions of change can change certain things that are within their concept of change. Certain things can only change at a grassroots level, and the grassroots level change is as important as either the mid or macro level change. If you only think of macro level changes and you ignore the grassroots level changes, you will have something that has no roots.
Right.
The roots are actually the small ones, the people who are empowered at small levels. and as that should begin to grow.
Right. Yeah, because it's hard to say that it's from a top-down perspective that here's a blanket approach to solve issue X, Y, Z, when the communities themselves are like, that's actually different in our context than it may be different in other people's context. The importance of grassroots engagement. Another question from Columbia, South Carolina, it says there is a tension between changing too fast and not changing fast enough. You don't want to lose a generation because change is happening too slow, but you also don't want to force change to happen so fast that you risk unity and you risk peace. So the question is, how do you navigate that tension?
So the navigation of that tension or that change is what the people, some people will think it's too fast, some people will think it's too slow. Somewhere in between that lies the truth. So you've got to learn to listen to both sides, and both sides have to listen to each other and think, what can be changed now, what can be changed tomorrow. Again, we come back to this word participation.
Right.
Because I'm always for change. I love change. Some people don't like change.
Yeah.
And I have to learn to work with that. Sorry about that.
It's all good. Somebody's probably calling in a question.
So I thought I'd put it on vibrate. Sorry, really sorry.
Technology works that way sometimes. But yeah, so navigating the tension in general, you said there's a perfect balance. There's a place in between that's the right answer. So in addition, when it comes to people who are in leadership right now, how do leaders promote healthy change? If you're in government or in a position of leadership over people, how do you promote that healthy change?
Well, when you're in a higher level of leadership, if you want a healthy change, once again, now I don't know this, I think it's overdone maybe in Switzerland, but you know that in Switzerland, whenever something has to be changed, they have a referendum.
Right.
And I mean, in one sense I love it, it's very expensive to get change done. But people like it because then they are being heard. So if something is done, they know that they have all said something and it's being done, and that maybe later on if they want to change, they can change it again. It's not written down in stone. So the idea of creating change is putting it out and asking for feedback from people.
Yeah.
And when you get that much, ultimately if it's a change that's going to affect everybody's life, everybody should have a say in it.
Right, exactly. Making sure those who are going to be affected have a voice in.
And they've all agreed, and then they feel if all have agreed, and then I'm willing to go along with that because that's what everybody thinks. Later on, you can always, if you know that change can happen, you know that one person can change.
Right.
As well as a majority can hold rule. So it just has to move back and forth.
Yeah, and you have to be willing to kind of let it flow.
Exactly.
In those ways. So when it comes to listening to both sides, is that mainly a role, the responsibility of leaders to encourage listening to both sides, or how do we approach even that in and of itself? Because that's big when it comes to peace building and being able to listen to the other side and maybe being able to understand their perspective.
Yes. It is up to the leaders to do that, but then leaders might have their own baggage and their own problems. So it's also how I approach a leader. Do I approach a confrontational style? You're wrong. Those of you who have read the I'm okay, you're okay, or the win-win, win-win, win-lose, lose-lose. So you have to try to approach something on a win-win basis.
Right.
You don't approach it and say, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong and I'm right, and if you do it my way, we're going to have a better deal. That way you're going to get a very confrontational and very different. So it's up to leaders, yes, but it's also up to you how you approach it, how you go about it. And I come back, I'm waiting to hear something from you. More than I'm waiting to hear somebody who tells me, I have done this, or this is my experience and I'd like to share it.
Yeah, we're still waiting to get a couple of those. We still have time, so please feel free to send in your comments, your stories. We want to continue to engage on this. We did get one comment in that's from Marcus Way. It says, people who don't love change should not be allowed in society.
No, that is the same thing that we are doing.
It's the same side of a different coin. From Susan in Columbia, South Carolina, I agree when people in leadership can remain fluid and include people's thoughts and opinions and decisions being made, that because that promotes healthy change, being willing as a leader to listen to other people, maybe even being a leader in the sense of being a servant, right? Where instead of just taking advantage of the power that I'm in, finding ways to engage and learn from others, even though I'm in a position of leadership or power, quote unquote, from other people. As we start to wind down towards the end of our time together, what is something that our audience can take away, maybe a practical step on either addressing their power struggle in their life, or even how they can be more of a proponent of participation in their spheres?
Well, the first thing is try to learn, and the great thing is today that learning is huge. The capacity to learn about all of this is huge. You can learn about it. The more you learn about it, the better equipped you are to deal with it. That's the first thing. Because if you don't, no matter what you think, if you don't know what to do, you can't do it. And obviously we are only trying to arouse your interest. This is not a teaching session. It's a kind of to motivate you to actually think. Because if you don't think for yourself, it's never going to work.
Yeah. So we just got another question in from the Reconciliation Center, Sri Lanka United's Reconciliation Center in Mona Ragala. It says, as youth, we want to make a difference in society so badly, but we don't really get that chance. Sometimes they don't even care to listen to what we have to say. So what could be a solution, a first step for the youth to try to make an impact in society? You kind of mentioned something earlier about starting small.
So I was coming to that. So the first thing is, you go and study what has been done elsewhere, where change has been made by others, how others have been agents of change. So you kind of motivate yourself by learning from others and learning about the situation. The second thing you do is you go to the other extreme. Now that you are equipped, you are better equipped because you can never stop learning. You look at starting with yourself. I said a change starts with yourself. You look at how you would change yourself. Because if you can change something, then others can change. Then you pull a small group together, your own small group, and look at what you can change as a small group. What change can you make? Either it may be a big change, it may be a small change, but you look at working on that change based on a participation.
Right.
Based on these principles of participation, where power is subjected to a common participation. Once you have done that, you have an example. It's like you have in your garden, you grow something as an example, and you can show your neighbor, look, I've grown this, and it's a beautiful plant.
Right.
And maybe, and I'm hoping you grow vegetable plants rather than flowers. And then they might want to grow it again. But if you don't grow it, you can't advise other people. So you must make it happen. You must have that example.
Right. As we close tonight, Mr. Tony, we want to thank you for the engaging conversation. We want to thank our audience for the questions and the comments that were submitted from all over the world. We're so honored to even have this opportunity to even discuss this with you guys, and technology makes it incredible to be able to communicate with so many different people in so many different time zones. We're going to continue the conversation on social media with Global Unites. If you don't already, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter. And if there are topics that you and the audience are curious about and would like to see us talk about in the future, please let us know so that we can engage and continue to do things that are and talk about topics that are impacting you, and that you can take what we talk about, the discussions as a community that we talk about, and engage in your everyday lives to make positive impacts. We hope to see you in November for the next edition of the Global Unite webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you.
7:59. That was a lot of you and me. I'm sorry. The engagement wasn't as high up as we would like to have.
No, the questions were okay. The questions, one thing I was hoping that some people would come.